Every story has three sides: yours, theirs, and the truth somewhere in between. December, the darkest month. We light our trees, we kindle our hearths, we gather with those we love and push back against the encroaching night with fire and evergreen branches and the warmth of celebration. We call it Christmas now, a festival of light in the depth of winter. But the flames we kindle are older than that name, older than the religion that claimed them, older perhaps than we dare to remember. This is where the story gets interesting. The winter solstice, December 21st or 22nd in the northern hemisphere, the longest night of the year, the moment when the sun stands still, solstistere the Romans called it, before turning back toward life. For most of human history this was not a certainty, it was a prayer answered. Each year as darkness swallowed more and more of the day, ancient peoples watched the sky with mounting dread. Would the sun abandon them entirely? Would winter claim the world forever? And so they lit fires, massive bonfires that roared against the cold. They brought evergreen branches into their homes, pine and fir and holly, living things that refused to die even when all else had withered. They burned a great log, oak or ash or fruitwood, and kept it burning for 12 days. They feasted, they sang, they made offerings to forces they could barely name. We inherited these customs. The Christmas tree was once a Yule tree. The wreath on your door descends from pagan protection spells. Even the Yule log, now a chocolate cake dusted with powdered sugar, was once the beating heart of midwinter magic. But what if I told you these weren't simply quaint traditions borrowed and baptized? What if the flames we light each December are echoes of something far more primal? A ritual born not from celebration, but from terror. The real story begins in the frozen forests of northern Europe, more than 2,000 years ago, when the longest night was not a holiday, it was a test of survival. Yule, the very word, is ancient. Linguistic evidence traces it to Proto-Germanic culture, to words like Jolo, meaning festival or celebration, used more than 2 millennia ago by the Viking Age. The Norse called it Jul. Anglo-Saxons knew it as Giol. The 8th century historian Bede documented Juli as a period marking the sun's return in Germanic and Anglo-Saxon calendars, but Yule's roots reach deeper still. Archaeological evidence suggests elements of the festival date to the late Stone Age. This was not a tradition borrowed from neighbours, it was carved into the European consciousness, when survival itself hung by the thinnest thread. The winter solstice for these ancient peoples was a cosmic crisis. The sun, giver of life, warmth, growth, was dying. Each day it rose later and set earlier. Each night grew longer, colder, hungrier. What we know for certain is this: Yule was not initially a celebration. It was a desperate spell. A community binding itself together with fire and food and ritual sacrifice, literally trying to magic the sun back to life. Historical records show that Yule was observed over 12 nights. Not 12 days of light-hearted celebration, but 12 nights of vigil, the 12 nights of Yule. Each one fraught with meaning and danger. Contemporary accounts tell us these nights were considered thin times. The veil between the living world and the realm of the dead grew gossamer fragile. The dead could walk, spirits could cross over, and gods themselves might descend to pass judgment on mortals. The centerpiece of these 12 nights was the Yule log. Not a decoration, not a symbol, a literal beacon of hope. Oak was preferred, sacred to thunder gods, embodying strength and endurance. The log was carefully selected, blessed, and ceremonially lit. Once lit, the log had to burn continuously. Its flame could not be allowed to go out, for the log's fire and the sun's fire were sympathetically linked. If the log died, so too might the sun. Families took shifts through the night, feeding the flames, singing, telling stories, keeping watch. What remained of the log after 12 days was precious. The ashes were scattered on fields to bless crops, kept under beds to protect against lightning, hidden in homes as talismans against evil. The Yule log's magic didn't end when it burned out. It transformed, became part of the coming year's protection and prosperity. Yet the danger of the 12 nights wasn't simply symbolic. According to myth and folklore passed down through generations, something hunted during Yule the Wild Hunt. Led by Odin himself, called Jolnir during this time, Master of Yule, the Wild Hunt was a spectral procession that raced across the winter sky. Odin rode Sleipnir, his 8-legged horse. Behind him came legions of spirits, the honoured dead, the dishonoured dead, supernatural hounds, warriors who had fallen in battle, women who had died in childbirth, all riding, hunting, screaming through the frozen air. The evidence points to a complex mythology. The hunt wasn't simply chaos, it was cosmic maintenance. Odin and his spirits hunted malevolent entities, the undead Draugr who refused to rest, evil spirits that preyed on the living, creatures that emerged during the thin times to cause harm. But mortals caught outside during the hunt's passage faced terrible danger. Contemporary chronicles tell us that those who looked upon the hunt might be struck blind. Those who called out to it might be swept up into its ranks, doomed to ride forever. Those who showed disrespect might find their homes cursed, their families struck with misfortune. And so, families huddled indoors during the 12 nights. They left offerings outside their doors, bowls of porridge, hay for Sleipnir, mead poured onto the frozen ground. These weren't gestures of worship alone, they were protection payments, acknowledgements that during Yule the normal rules were suspended. Here's what's interesting. Odin during Yule wasn't only the fearsome god of war and death, he was also the Yule father, the gift giver. Some myths tell of Odin disguised in a blue cloak visiting homes, rewarding those who had left appropriate offerings with gifts or good fortune. Sound familiar? The flying steed, the midnight visits, the gifts for good behaviour. Santa Claus is a domesticated Odin, his wild hunt transformed into a cheerful sleigh ride, his spectral warriors into helpful elves. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We've sanitised these stories, turned terror into wonder. The original Yule was not safe, not comfortable, not certain. Modern scholars suggest that Yule's most important ritual has been almost entirely forgotten by contemporary culture. It wasn't the feasting, or the singing, or even the Yule log, it was the blot, the sacrifice. Archaeological evidence reveals the centrality of animal sacrifice to pagan Yule celebrations. Horses and boars primarily. The horse was associated with land fertility, the sacredness of kings, ensuring the harvest. The boar symbolised strength, fertility, abundance. The ritual followed a precise pattern. Participants, particularly warriors and leaders, would place their hands upon the sacrificial animal, usually a boar, and swear sacred oaths. These weren't casual promises, they were binding by pagan law. Breaking a Yule oath was thought to bring dire consequences, misfortune, madness, death. What we discover here is fascinating. Yule wasn't about joyful celebration, it was about renewal through bloodshed, death that brought life. The animal would be ritually slain, its blood collected in bowls and sprinkled on altars, on the walls of great halls, on the participants themselves using magical twigs. This was not barbarism, it was theology. The blood was life itself given back to the gods, to the earth, to the spirits, to ensure that life would continue, that spring would return, that the sun would be reborn. Then, and this is crucial, the meat was eaten. A communal feast where gods, ancestors and the living all partook. This wasn't waste, it was profound redistribution. The sacred animal fed the community through the darkest time, its spirit honoured, its sacrifice remembered. At sites throughout Scandinavia and Northern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of these midwinter feasts. Animal bones bearing ritual butchering marked burned areas indicating communal cooking. Intentional burial of remains near burial mounds, connecting the feast to ancestor veneration. Some historical accounts push even further into darkness. The Ynglinga saga and the Chronicon of Thietmar of Merseburg describe winter sacrifices at Leisure in Denmark that included not just animals, but controversially, the offering of humans, 99 men, horses, dogs, and chickens, sacrificed to appease the gods and ensure prosperity. The archaeological evidence for human sacrifice in Yule contexts remains debated, but what's undeniable is this. Ancient peoples believed the darkness demanded payment. The sun's rebirth required exchange, life for life, blood for blood. Hope purchased a terrible price. symbols we inherited from Yule carry meanings we've forgotten. Evergreens, fir, pine, holly, mistletoe. We see them as decorations now, festive and cheerful. But to ancient peoples, they were miraculous. Everything else died, everything else withered. But these trees remained green. They were proof that life could endure, that death was not absolute. Holly and mistletoe were especially powerful. Holly's red berries represented blood and life force. Its sharp leaves were protection against evil spirits. Mistletoe, the plant that grows on trees without touching earth, was considered neither of heaven nor earth, a liminal guardian that could repel dark magic and foster fertility. The Yule goat, often crafted from straw, likely connected to Thor, the Norse god of thunder and fertility. Some traditions involved the goat being symbolically killed and resurrected during Yule, another death and rebirth ritual mirroring the sun's cycle. Yet alongside these life-affirming symbols existed darker folklore. The Thin Times invited not just ancestors and gods, but malevolent spirits. Local folklore spoke of shadow stealers, beings that could rob a person of their shadow and thus their soul, of breathtakers who would suffocate sleeping children, of the ancient Icelandic Yule lads, who in early traditions weren't mischievous gift-givers, but terrifying figures with names like Lungnasletir, the Lung Crusher, and Breki the Breathtaker. These weren't children's stories. They were explanations for very real winter dangers: hypothermia, starvation, illness, the crushing psychological weight of months-long darkness in northern latitudes. The truth is always stranger than fiction. Yule's mixture of light and dark, hope and horror, reflected the reality of human existence at the edge of survival. You celebrated not because you had won, but because you might yet live to see another spring. As Christianity spread across northern Europe from the 5th century onward, the Church faced a problem. Yule was deeply embedded in the cultural consciousness. It was tied to agricultural cycles, community bonds, the very rhythm of life itself. You couldn't simply eradicate it. People would resist, rebel. So the Church did something clever. It absorbed Yule, transformed it, claimed it. Christ's birth was not historically recorded as occurring in December. Early Christian scholars debated the date extensively. But by the 4th century, the Church had settled on December 25th, right next to the winter solstice, right on top of Yule. The evidence suggests this was deliberate. You couldn't stop people from celebrating the sun's rebirth, but you could reframe it as celebrating the sun's birth. The Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, became the Son of God. The returning light became the light of the world, and the customs, they survived nearly intact. The Yule log became a Christian tradition. The evergreens remained. The feasting continued. Even the 12 nights persisted, rebranded as the 12 days of Christmas. What's fascinating is how incomplete the transformation was. Scratch the surface of Christmas, and Yule bleeds through. We still bring trees indoors, a practice that would seem bizarre without its pagan context. We still light candles against the dark. We still feast, give gifts, tell ghost stories. The Wild Hunt didn't disappear either. It darkened, evolved. In Christian retellings, the hunt became demonic, a warning against paganism. Odin became a devil figure. The honoured dead became the damned. The ritual that once protected communities became a cautionary tale about the dangers of pre-Christian beliefs. Yet the stories persisted. Folklore is resilient. Even as the Church worked to suppress pagan traditions, people kept telling the old tales, kept lighting their fires, kept watching the sky on the longest night. Here's what's interesting. In a sense, Yule never truly died. It just put on new clothes, changed its name, learned to speak a different language. But the fire at its heart, that desperate, defiant flame kindled against the dark, still burns. So here we are, December again, the darkest time of year, and like our ancestors 2,000 years ago, we light fires. What we discover when we look deeply at Yule is not really about paganism versus Christianity. It's not about which tradition is authentic, or who borrowed what from whom. It's about the human response to darkness. The winter solstice is an astronomical fact, a moment when the Earth's tilt puts us at our furthest point from the sun's warmth. For most of human history, this wasn't an inconvenience managed with thermostats and grocery stores. It was an existential threat. Our ancestors understood something we've forgotten. Darkness is not simply the absence of light. It's a presence, it presses in, it tests you, and without community, without ritual, without symbols that remind you that life persists, it can break you. The Yule flame wasn't just warmth, it was testimony. It said, "We are here, we endure, we defy the dying of the light, not because we are certain of survival, but because the alternative is surrender." The deeper truth of Yule is about cycles, not just the sun cycle, but life's cycle, the pattern that ancient peoples saw reflected in everything, day and night, summer and winter, birth and death, growth and decay. These aren't opposites, they're phases of an eternal rhythm. The winter solstice marks the moment when the cycle turns, when death reaches its apex and, impossibly miraculously, begins to transform back into life. Not because death is defeated, but because death is part of the process. Necessary, even sacred. This is why the sacrifice was so central to Yule. The ritual death of the sacred animal wasn't cruelty. It was participation in the cosmic pattern. By giving death consciously, ritually, gratefully, you became part of the cycle rather than its victim. Modern psychology recognizes this as archetypal, the death and rebirth motif that appears in every culture, every mythology, every religion. We undergo it in our own lives, the death of childhood, of innocence, of old selves, and the rebirth that follows if we allow it, if we have the courage to light our own flames against our own darknesses. Here's the most radical truth about Yule. It was not based on certainty. Our ancestors didn't know, not scientifically, not certainly, that the sun would return. They had observed patterns, yes, but patterns can break. The universe is not obligated to repeat itself. Every Yule was an act of faith, of defiance, of choosing hope even when you couldn't guarantee it was justified. This is what we've lost in our age of scientific certainty. We know the sun will return, we have mathematical proof. The mystery is gone, and with it perhaps some of the meaning. The ancient Yule celebrants lit their fires knowing they might fail, knowing winter might win, knowing that hope itself was a gamble, and they lit them anyway. That is courage. Not the courage of knowing you'll win, but the courage of trying even when you don't know. The Wild Hunt, the Draugr, the Yule Lads, the Shadow Stealers, these weren't simply superstitions, they were acknowledgements of what lives in the darkness, both in the world and in ourselves. Winter darkness, extended darkness, does things to the human psyche. Seasonal depression is not a modern invention. Our ancestors experienced it too. They just called it spirits, hauntings, the thin times when boundaries dissolved. What we know for certain is that acknowledging the darkness was part of Yule's wisdom. You didn't pretend winter was safe. You didn't pretend death wasn't real. You looked directly at the shadow and said, "I see you, I acknowledge you, and still I will light this flame." This is psychologically sophisticated. Modern therapy recognizes that denying shadow aspects of self only gives them power, but acknowledging them, naming them, making offerings to them as the ancients did, this integrates them, transforms them from enemies into teachers. The Wild Hunt hunted evil spirits, remember. Odin led the charge against the Draugr. The darkness contained within it the force that fought darkness. The solution was in the problem. The cure was in the poison. So what does an ancient pagan festival mean for us now, in our age of electric lights and climate control and scientific certainty? Everything, perhaps. We've conquered winter technologically, but we haven't conquered darkness. We've solved physical cold, but not spiritual cold. We've beaten back the night with electricity, but depression, loneliness, despair, these still hunt us. The truth is always stranger than fiction. We have more than our ancestors could have dreamed of. More comfort, more safety, more knowledge. And yet we struggle with the same fundamental questions. What is the meaning? How do we survive darkness? How do we kindle hope? Yule offers an answer. Together, with ritual, with symbols that connect us to something larger than ourselves, with the deliberate, defiant act of lighting a flame even when, especially when, the darkness feels overwhelming. This is why Yule symbols persist, why we still bring trees indoors, why we still light candles, why we still gather. These aren't quaint holdovers. They're survival mechanisms, psychological technologies, perfected over millennia for coping with darkness. The winter solstice happens every year. It has happened for billions of years. It will continue happening long after humanity is gone, but that makes it no less miraculous, no less worthy of celebration, no less necessary to mark and honour. Because the miracle isn't that the sun returns. The miracle is that we notice, that we care, that we gather together and light fires and tell stories and insist that this moment matters. The sun doesn't need us to celebrate its return. It will return regardless. But we need to celebrate it. We need the ritual. We need the symbol. We need the reminder that after darkness comes light, that the cycle continues. That hope is not foolish, but fundamental. This is the deeper truth of Yule. The truth that transcends paganism and Christianity, ancient and modern, belief and skepticism. The truth that as long as humans exist, we will face darkness. And as long as we face darkness, we will gather together and light flames against it. Not because we are certain they will save us, but because we are human. And humans make fire, and fire makes hope, and hope makes tomorrow possible. At Three Truths Project, we give voice to the forgotten, the twisted, and the true. The surface truth, we light fires and trees to celebrate Christmas. The hidden truth, these are remnants of Yule, a festival to rekindle the dying sun. The deeper truth, the Yule flame isn't just warmth, it's hope, it's rebirth, it's the eternal return of light. And then, imperceptibly, the sun begins its return journey. Some stories are too important to forget. This is one of them. Every year we reenact an ancient spell. We light our flames, we honour the darkness, we choose hope, we participate in the cycle, and every year the sun returns. Not because of our fires, but perhaps, just perhaps, we light them anyway because that's what it means to be human, to see the darkness, to acknowledge it, and to light a flame regardless. History hides in plain sight. The truth is, it always has. At Three Truths Project, we give voice to the forgotten, the twisted, and the true. Like, subscribe, and listen closely.